Good af Good afternoon, class. My name is Luis Rosario, and this is my book report on To Kill a Mockingbird. The book summary, basically, To Kill a Mockingbird is a book about growing up under extraordinary circumstances in the 1930s in Macomb, Alabama. The book is narrated by a young girl by the name of Jean Louise Finch. However, throughout the book, she is called Scout. Scout lived with her father, Atticus Finch, who is a lawyer, her young brother, Jem Finch, and the children's stay-at-home nanny, who was an African-American woman by the name of Calpurnia. The children's mother passed away before Scout was old enough to know her, and this will become important later on in the book. Scout was a tomboy, and her father taught her how to read, which at the time it was not socially acceptable for girls to read. Throughout the entire book, you see Scout run into problems because many of her actions were not socially acceptable. One example was when she was in her classroom and she was reading. Her teacher scolded her because she knew how to read and told her not to read anymore. Another example in the book about her tomboyish, way of being was when she was looked at different because she liked to play with boys and wear overalls, which at the time boys only wore pants and girls wore dresses. Top right of the picture, you can see Mr. Finch. You can see Scout on the right side, and on the left side, that's her older brother Jem. You can see that she's wearing overalls, and that is their caretaker, Miss Calpurnia. Sorry, I have a hard time saying that. Everyone knew everyone in this town and gossiped about everyone. The only exception was this gentleman by the name of Boo Riley, who they never saw, the children. And so they were very intrigued by this man because nobody knows anything about him. So in the book, you see them, trying to sneak in at night in the porch and look through the windows to see if they could see him. And this character is very important at the end of the book, and I'll tell you more about it later. The story took a huge turn, from daily day living and the young girl having struggles with her social identity as a tomboy. When her father was asked to take a case by the town judge and defend an African American man by the name of Tom Robinson, who was being accused of raping a young 19-year-old woman who happened to be white. Her father, Bobby Wool, was very angry when Mr. Atticus, took the case, and the town started calling him and the children the N-word lovers. I'm not going to say it for respect, for my classmates and everybody. And Scout again, her tomboyishness, she fought boys who talked bad about her family. And so one day, Mr. Finch, set her down because she just got into a fight and told her not to fight, and explained to them that a man had to stand up and do what is right no matter the cost. So again, Mr. Finch, was a pioneer during the 1930s when this book was written and standing up for, anybody in the court of law. And so you see Mr. Finch and the African American men and the Ewell family angrily looking at him with contempt. The last few chapters of the book go over the court case and Mr. Finch, he proved beyond the benefit of the doubt there's no way that Mr. Robinson would have raped her and abused her. He had a bum arm, and so therefore that was impossible for him to choke her and beat her with both hands because he got his hand caught in a cotton gin accident when he was 12, so he's never been able to use his right hand, so he only uses his left hand. And so this angered Bob Ewell, and even though he proved it in court, the one thing, they judged the case against the favor of the African American man and basically essentially put him in jail for something he didn't do. And so basically later on, Mr. Bob Ewell, and some men killed the man, the African American man. And so then in the story, everything goes back to normal. But a few weeks pass by after this, and Scout, the main character, and her brother Jem were walking home from a school play through the woods, and it was dark. So Mr. Bob Ewell, drunk, decided, hey, I'm going to get back at Mr. Finch for defending, the N-word guy, and so he basically with a knife tries to kill them, and a mysterious man shows up and defends the children, ends up killing Mr. Ewell, and he takes the young boy home who happened in their ordeal get his arm broken, and basically the town um, sheriff showed up to do the investigation, and he decided that Mr. Bobby Ewell, had killed an innocent man already, and he couldn't do nothing about it because society, has certain, it was taboo for a black man to be with a white woman, so he did not want to rock the boat. So he just said, I'm just going to rule it as he fell on top of his knife when he tried to kill your children. And it was then that, if you look at the picture on the bottom, that the mysterious man happened to be the neighbor they've been trying to get to know, the children were trying to get to know the whole time. All right, so the problem that I saw in the book, first of all, the primary mission of social work is to enhance humans' well-being and help meet the basic needs of all people. There are many issues, that a social worker can derive from the story, but for all intended purposes, I'm going to focus with the main character, Scout. And, basically the problems that I see with her throughout the book is that, she is running into a lot of gender role issues. She doesn't have a mother, so, everything she's learned is from her father alone. And she did not understand, the gender roles until she started feeling the friction when she started going to school. Her father taught her to read at a very early age and allowed her to determine her own identity rather than allow society to develop it for her. This created problems for her throughout the story because she always felt different than all the other girls. An example of this was when she had to wear a dress in the book. She was very timid and very scared and just didn't like the whole ordeal. Later on in the story, she was about to fall asleep and she asked her brother about their mother. What was she like? Was she beautiful? Did you love her? Do you think she loved me? These questions should be addressed. Children should know, what their parents thought about them, especially when they passed away. And I think that, the father should, bring peace to the daughter's heart with these questions. Throughout the book, Scout has problems understanding society's expectation, unanswered questions about her mother and her own place in the world. And these are the pictures of her father, reading, her tomboyish attitude. She fought the young boy in the park because he made her look like a fool in class. And at the bottom, she wanted to quit school because she didn't fit in. So her father told her, hey, let's make a compromise. When you're at home, you could be whoever you want, but, go to school and do good. So Strengths Perspective states that, uh, Strengths Perspective is based on the assumption that all humans have the capacity for growth, change, and adaptation. Using this perspective to help Scout with understanding societal expectation and answer questions about her mother and her own place in the world would mean that one would need to identify her skill, goals, and talents. As a social worker, one would help her understand what are societal expectations for young women, so that she can understand why adults react to her the way they do. This is not to help her change the identity that she's identified with, just so that she can understand why they react the way they do. Her being a tomboy is a strength of hers because, she feels very secure in that. Not knowing her mother was something that troubled her, and her father made no efforts to reconcile these questions with her. Setting up a meeting with Mr. Finch and her would be great because this would allow for these questions to be answered and lead to healing in her heart. She is very talented, smart, and should be praised, not punished for her father because her father accepts her as she is. So I really believe that, her father is also, a strength of hers because he supports her identity and he makes her feel good about herself. System theory. System theory views human behavior as the result of active interactions between people and their social system. Systems can include couples, families, school, communities, government, and social service agencies. Looking at Scout's circumstances through this theoretical lens, we would first need to identify her systems. In the home, she had her father, brother, who supported her identity as a tomboy. In their neighborhood, she's socially looked at as a young girl who loves to play with her brother. Her lack of being a girl, according to society, is understood because she did not have a mother to teach her those things. The school system and society as a whole, caused a lot of friction for her. The feedback that she is getting is negative. However, her father loved and accepted her. An acceptance of her drives her back to homeostasis. The bond between her and her family creates synergy. Over time, Scout will develop differentiation, which means that her home system will move towards a more complex form of functioning while maintaining their unique characteristics. Social construction perspective was the last theory that I used. This perspective focuses on how people learn through their interactions with each other to classify the world and their place in the world. People are seen as social beings who interact with each other and the physical world based on shared meanings. One may say, utilizing this perspective, that Scout's sense of self as a tomboy is shaped by her continued interaction with her father and brother. Her identity clashes with the societal realities of gender identity. She has yet to learn how to perform for her social audience, meaning her school and her neighbors. This understanding may have been developed by traditional image of women at that time. She is being constrained by pre-existing social and cultural structures created by society's predecessors, meaning the women before her. My personal culture experience with this story, I would have to say that Mr. Finch was a pioneer in his time, meaning that, he was teaching his kids stuff that we're living today. He treated his children with respect and allowed them to generate their own personal identities. He believed that both his children should attain education regardless of their gender. He allowed his daughter to wear clothes not suited for her gender in a time that it was not socially acceptable. Throughout the book, the children were allowed to speak freely to their father, and this was also not socially acceptable. When I was a kid growing up in Puerto Rico, boys went out with their fathers, and they were taught what was expected of a young boy, and my sister spent time in the kitchen learning to cook and play gender appropriate games with her girlfriends. Throughout the book, you see that living in a small town leads to people commenting on how children should be raised to the children themselves. This was best seen when the teacher basically scolded her and told not to read. Growing up, if a teacher or a neighbor shamed my siblings or me, they had something to say to us negatively, my father would talk to that adult and tell them to leave the parenting to him and for them to mind their own business. In the 1930s, it was not customary for a person of color to be with with a white person, and I am glad that in my time, in our time, those barriers have been completely broken. I also say that our legal system, if I have to compare with the one in the book, has improved drastically because Mr. Robinson, the African American man, would have never made it even to court or even to jail because all the evidence against him was, hearsay, she say. He was solely indicted due to the fact that a white woman liked him and kissed him without him making any advances. And I'm glad that today this does not happen, although, our court system it's not perfect. People more accepting of a person's right to self-determination when it comes to gender roles, and one may not discriminate legally over someone's gender identity, which was another difference that I found. These are some of the many cultural reflections that I found in the text, and this is the end of my presentation. These are my references, so please, if you have any comments, and I'm sorry for the lengthy video, this is my first time. As you guys all know, I'm pretty long-winded, and I apologize. Thank you.